Brett McGurk, Turkey is an asset to NATO, yes or no?
I'm going to say no.
Thank you.
Interesting.
I am not saying we should kick Turkey out of NATO, but the question in the present tense, are they an asset to NATO? And what is NATO? It's a vital transatlantic alliance aimed to protect the security and prosperity of its members. And on that standard, Turkey right now is not an asset to NATO. I'm going to look at the Trump administration's national security strategy. What do we care about? Great power competition, China and Russia, international terrorism, and Iran. On all three measures right now, Turkey is not an asset. On international terrorism, I ran the ISIS campaign. 40,000 foreign fighters, jihadis from 110 countries around the world, all came into Syria to fight in that war, and they all came through Turkey. The caliphate was on the border of Turkey. We worked with Turkey. I was in Turkey more than any other country to have them seal their border, and they would not do it. They said they couldn't do it. But the minute the Kurds took parts of the border, it's totally sealed with a wall. So let's just be honest about the record. It is not the fact that we went with the YPG and told Turkey to sit in a corner. That's just not factual. On Iran, Turkey was the biggest sanctions buster backdoor of any country around the world to Iran. Almost $100 billion in a sanctions busting scheme went through Turkey by their own state-owned bank, the general manager of whom was prosecuted here in the Southern District of New York. And Erdogan accused that judge and our judicial system of being run by the cleric in Gulen in Pennsylvania, which is ridiculous. On Russia, Turkey is buying, the only NATO member, buying sophisticated military hardware from Russia. That is a serious problem. NATO is an alliance formed against
sorry,
Russia.
Time is up.
So the answer,
I think you're going to have
no.
a lot of chance to talk in the next. The reason Turkey, in your view, is not an asset right now has a lot to do with our treatment of Turkey, and that could be corrected.
So first, I'm very confident if you look at any public opinion poll in Turkey almost any year, Americans are very unpopular. Before we ever heard of this group, the YPG in Northeast Syria, which I can talk to, but I don't want that to dominate the whole debate, but before we ever heard of the YPG, and we decided to go to war against ISIS because ISIS was committing genocide and it was controlling 8 million people across Iraq and Syria. You'll know about ISIS. We went to Turkey and said, hey, let's fight this together. We want to fly to Incirlik Air Base to target ISIS. We need you to do some things on the border, et cetera, et cetera. And frankly, I have to be honest, they did nothing. They would not let us fly out of Incirlik Air Base. They would not let us do anything. It was incredibly frustrating. We tried to do everything we possibly could with the Syrian opposition working out of Turkey, and too many times they were completely interwoven with extremist groups tied to al-Qaeda that we could not work with, and Turkey, frankly, did not do much to help at all. The YPG was a group that was surrounded by ISIS.
For those who don't know the terminology.
The YPG is a Syrian Kurdish group in northeast Syria. They were about to be slaughtered with a bunch of Kurdish civilians at a little town on the border of Turkey. They're affiliated with...
Is it the PKK?
We'll come back to that, Michael.
Here's a key question. Has there ever been an attack from Syria into Turkey from this group? The answer is no. The answer is no. And who made the decision? Who made the decision to arm the YPG? It was actually President Trump, not President Obama. So there's a lot of history here that I want to make sure that we get absolutely right. But when ISIS was about to take this Kurdish town on the border with Turkey, we made the decision to do what we could to help save this town. And frankly, at the time, Turkey was working with the YPG. They did an operation into Turkey, working in cooperative with the YPG. I was in Ankara to manage that operation, and it was a big success. And as soon as the Kurds started taking these towns away from ISIS on the border, Turkey totally sealed their border. We said, why didn't you seal the border when ISIS was there? And flatbed trucks were coming across the border with ammonium nitrate and weapons and all sorts of things. So there's a lot of history here, but the argument that Turkey suddenly turned a switch because we worked with the YPG is just simply... Michael and I say this with all due respect, but...
Love and affection.
But the problem with Michael's... I'm just going to back the lens up. This is a debate about the Middle East. The problem with his formula for the Middle East is he mentions Israel, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. Israel and Saudi Arabia, if they have really one... I mean, Iran is obviously enemy number one. Enemy number 1.5 is Erdogan. Saudi Arabia and Turkey are fighting proxy wars and supporting different groups all throughout the region. This is a serious problem. But the truth is that when it came to ISIS, we had to fight ISIS. I mean, what is the formula here? There was no Syrian opposition group that we could work with that could be effective. We invested hundreds of millions of dollars through the Department of Defense in certain groups, and when we inserted them into Syria, they gave half their equipment to al-Qaeda, and they ended up going backwards when they started military operations. This is a very desperate situation. But we did all we possibly could with Turkey. I was in Turkey, again, more than any other country in the entire coalition that we built. But it's not just northeast Syria. Turkey's threatening to come in northeast Syria to attack the Kurds, which will put American lives at risk. That's a serious problem. Erdogan is also saying, at the same time, he wants to push the Greeks into the sea because he has claims in the eastern Mediterranean. This is a problem throughout the region right now. Erdogan is a serious destabilizing actor.
Let me bring in